In the last video, we looked at a couple popular grid systems that you can work with in web design. And again, the point of working with a grid system inside of Photoshop is that you're going to be laying out your content in a way that can be easily reproduced writing CSS. And those grid systems are a great way to do that. Now, many of those grid systems that we looked at also have corresponding PSD files that have all of the guides for the grid system already set up. However, what if you run into a situation where you're working with a developer, or maybe you're the developer, and you're going to be using a particular grid system that you can't find a PSD file for? Well, if that's the case, it's going to be up to you to lay out all the guides for that grid system. Typically, what you'll do is come up to the File menu, and from there you'll choose New to create a new document. And you'll notice right now I have a document width of 1440 pixels. Even if your overall width for your website is going to be 960 pixels, sometimes it's easier to look at the website in a way that would be pretty representative of how someone on a desktop will view your website. So most people have much larger screen resolutions. 1440 is a pretty safe bet, especially if you're going to be working with images that take up the entire area of a particular region. The height is really something that will probably be adjustable based upon your layout. I'm just going to go ahead and leave 2250 here by default. You can always change it after the fact. And again, the background contents in this case will be white, but you can change that if necessary. If you come over and click OK, once you click OK, the new document will be created. At that point, you'll have to come up to the View menu, and from the View menu, you're going to have to choose Rulers. Control-R is the keyboard shortcut. And right now, the rulers are being displayed in inches, which is not all that helpful. So I'm going to come over to the Preferences dialog box. Here on the Windows side, you'll go to the Edit menu, and from there, you'll choose Preferences. Now, if you're working on a Mac, you'll go to the Photoshop menu and choose Preferences. And off the Preferences submenu, you can choose Units and Rulers. And here, we're going to change the rulers to pixels. Then you can click OK. Then you have to start dragging out guides. And typically, you'll zoom in so you see the ruler a little bit clearer in terms of its units. And then what you would do is start dragging out guides. Maybe you want a 50 pixel margin on the left, or because the document is 1440 pixels wide, maybe you want a much larger margin, like 200 or 250. And then after laying out that grid line, you'd have to figure out the width of the column and drag out a grid line for that. Then you'd have to leave a specific amount of space for the gutter and then drag out a new starting column guide for the next column, and so on and so forth. And it's a really time-consuming process. Fortunately, there's a much better way. If I just come out to the web here for just a moment, I'm going to show you an extension that you can download. It's called Guide Guide. You can go to guideguide.me, and here you'll have the ability to download this extension. Now, this extension exists for Photoshop CS5, CS6, and CC. So you'll go ahead and download it. Once you download it, you're going to need the extension manager to install this extension into Photoshop. If you don't have the extension manager, you can download it from the Creative Cloud website. Once you download it, you then have the ability to install it. Now, it just so happens that I already installed it. So once you install it, inside of Photoshop, what you'll do is come up to the Window menu, and from there you can choose Extensions, and in this case, you can choose Guide Guide. Now, you'll notice I already have some values entered in here, which is fine. But as you hover over these little icons will tell you what the text field represents. So here we're looking at the top margin, the bottom margin. A lot of times people will set up a guide for the bottom margin representing the end of the page but the beginning of the footer. Right now, I don't know the overall height of the document, so I'm not going to enter in a value here. I just want to set up these column guides. I'm going to go ahead and zoom out a little bit. So I'm going to choose the Zoom tool and just hold down the Alt key on Windows, Option on the Mac, and zoom out just a bit so we can see the overall width of the document. So the first margin here on the left-hand side will be 240 pixels. I'm going to use 12 columns in this grid. I want the columns to be 60 pixels wide, and I want 20 pixels of gutter space. But notice you have all these other options here inside this panel. But once you're happy with the settings that you establish here inside the Guide panel, you can come over here and click the GG button, and it just draws out all those guides for you. So it's a huge time saver. It's a great little extension. I would strongly recommend installing it inside of Photoshop if you're going to be using Photoshop to create a lot of mock-ups and wireframes. But this is probably the easiest way to create a guide for a grid system that you want to use for a layout.